Hello, I am Mudita, and welcome back to Satisfactory. This is the 7th episode in the series of videos that'll go over a lot of my blueprints. I will be using a separate save that I call my Blueprint Playground. This has every advanced game setting turned on, making this effectively creative mode. I want to show off how these are made, in case you want to make your own or edit these ones to fit your needs. In the last episode, I covered my basic rail line blueprints. Today, I'm going to go over how I build supports for the rail network and how I blueprinted my roundabouts. These blueprints are all free to use, and the link to the Google Drive is in the description. Trains are a fantastic way to move resources and parts around the map. As much as I love the other vehicles, they just really don't compare to how much and how far trains can transport. I am by no means an expert at trains in this game, however, I have spent a lot of time using them and have learned quite a bit. Let me show you how I've made these simple blueprints. And here we are, back in the Dune Desert. To start things off, I want to clarify a couple things that I went over in the last video. So like I mentioned in editing, I found a much easier way to do this sharp turn. So let me show you that. So I'm actually going to delete these because once you don't have the extra piece sticking off, it's actually a little bit hard. So just like last time, in default mode, this will just easily snap to any of the straight tracks. So instead of having this be 2 levels, I realized that was silly and I could make all of this just 10 times easier just having it be like this. So the principle is the same. I'm going to zoom down 2 pieces right here. I'm going to delete that single foundation, switch back to blueprint so I can copy this one. And now I can just easily snap this right on top. So this foundation and that foundation need to line up, and then it's going to continue the turn. So, and then just like before, you delete the bottom 2 pieces, you place 2 new ones, delete that. It is obviously a little bit tedious, but if you've ever manually placed turns like this by hand, you'll probably recognize this is still going to be a bit faster, especially if you want to add more to it than the real basic kind of design that I've gone for. So if you have any signs for lights or any other cosmetics, this is just going to save you a whole lot of time and effort. And just like that, I can make the curve pretty quickly. And someone in the comments had asked, if you start with the global grid, will it end up back on the global grid? And so I knew that 9 of these would make a 90-degree turn. So 18 of them would be a full 180. However, I wasn't quite sure where it would line up with the global grid. So this right here is built on the global grid, so I can build another one right here just to test it. Build that out, and it's exactly right on the global grid. So I built this starting on the global grid, and then I just went with the gentle turn and the sharp turn just to see where it would end up. So if you go for a full 180, the sharp turn is only going to be off by a tiny bit. That's really not too much. That's less than a meter, about half a meter almost exactly, but it's still like ever so slightly off. So because of all of the turning, you are just going to be slightly off from the global grid. Whereas the gentle turn ends up being off by quite a bit more. About 3 meters is how far you're going to be off. So not too bad, and there are some pretty easy ways to deal with it. The other thing I forgot to show off in the first video is how easy this is to connect the actual railway. Whenever you're working with a curve, in my experience, the best thing to do is make sure you have a straight piece to work off of. And most likely you're going to want to do the same thing at the other end. So you want to have a nice short straight track to be able to start and end with. And that way anything after that you can make sure is going to be a nice straight piece, and you won't worry about there being like a tiny little weird little curve that'll go back and forth forever. So the way I do any of the curves, whether it's the short or the sharp one, is I want the straight piece to be lined up with the last straight foundation. So since this is all straight and this is the last one before it starts turning, I want this to end right here. And then from here I can grab And you'll notice that it lines up with this seam of the foundations, so I can go ahead and place that there. And then if I go again, another 2 foundations, and it'll line up with the seam of this one. And then I can do this all the way around. And if this is where the rail was going to be ending, and I needed a straight piece after that, if that curve wasn't there, I would lay it right from here to here, and then go ahead and connect that very last piece. And then that way I can build off this one and know that it's a straight line. But all of this works the same for the sharp turn. So if I was working this way, we would lay that straight piece going from there. And then the same thing is going to happen. The only difference is which line it's going to line up with. So obviously that one, it's not lined up right, but with that edge of the foundation it is. If we go to here, same thing. It doesn't line up with that one, it lines up with this one, so we'll place it there. And it'll line up with that one, and then same thing. So every 2 foundations, it'll line up with the edge of one of the 2 foundations. And it may look a little bit strange while you're placing it. And if it was going to straighten out here, the only issue would be that that isn't a long enough gap. So if I wanted it to straighten out from here, of course we're off by that 1 meter. I'd have to delete this piece and just connect it like that. But that would also get me lined up onto the new grid, and then all you have to do is worry about merging this part right here to look however you want it. Alright, let's talk about supports. So this is how I do my supports. There's just so many different ways you could do this, and I definitely suggest just playing around with it in the Blueprint Designer and find what works best for you and what you like the look of, because you're going to be the one staring at it more than anybody else. You can obviously make these very complex and make these look just 100 times better than what I've done. I went with very simplistic designs. As I mentioned in the past, I don't have the newest computer, and so I'm trying not to add just too many objects. And this is something that I knew I would place a lot of. So they're real simple. I'm just using the big frame pillar. Just zoop it up to whatever height you desire. And then I'm just using the big pillar supports because they merge really well with the big frame pillars and connect really easily to any of my other blueprints. So this is the support that I'm using for the double tracks, and pretty much the exact same thing, but for a single track is just this one to keep things uniform. I also really like using the big frame pillars because you can see through them, and I really like the kind of industrial look of the beams kind of going every which way. So let me show you how I place them. So we've got this sample track right here, and the way I like to space them out, now obviously this is really where you kind of have to make the decision. So if this train station wasn't here and I just needed to place one there, the way I go about it is I just count out 5 blueprints, and since each blueprint is 4 foundations, that gives me a gap of 20 foundations in between the supports. And I'm sure some people would much prefer them be closer together. I didn't want to bog down my world with just tons of objects, and so I try to find that happy medium of a good distance where it still felt supported, but there weren't just too many. 2, 3, 4, and then 5. And then all I do is grab the big frame pillar, zoop it all the way down to the bottom, and then instead of placing the very last one, I'll go one up from there. If you hit E once, it'll switch to the big pillar support, and then I'll just place that. So a lot of them are sunk into the ground. Some of them are just above it. Like for right here, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, so I'd probably put it there. And then go like that. And then I just change it to whatever color that I want. Having a hotbar with all of these kind of materials and whatever color you want to use would be my suggestion. Because if you didn't know, you can absolutely add colors to the hotbar. Now that one's on 7. So if you don't like that little gap, one thing I've done in the past is just pick whatever foundation you think fits best. So maybe just normal concrete, and then I just grab a foundation and put it under there. And then it looks like it kind of all fits together a little bit better. And if you'd rather them be on the same level, you could easily just grab another foundation, put that there, snap it to the bottom, and there you go. And then that way it looks a little bit more supported and it's not buried. And like I mentioned, these are about as simplistic as it gets as far as support pillars, and there are some fantastic videos that some other creators have made if you want to get some more inspiration for much cooler looking designs. I definitely recommend looking those up. And now on to probably the most interesting part of the video is roundabouts. So this is the small one, and this is how big the large one is. The other blueprint designer actually fits inside the radius, which is pretty crazy. So roundabouts are fantastic. They are a great junction, and if you can blueprint it, it just makes it so much easier. So I mentioned it before and I'll mention it again, and I'll put a link to his channel in the description, but I learned this from watching Pobkac's Twitch streams. The fact that you can build outside a blueprint designer and it still be considered one blueprint just blew my mind and opened up a whole bunch of possibilities, but truly he is the master. But let me show you how I did this. Hello, Mr. Bean. So to start things off, you need a single foundation of whatever track style you want to use. So like I covered in the last one, it's just a single 2-meter foundation with basic walls on either side, and that's it. So this is the base of what you need. Once you have that, go ahead and clear your designer. Once you've got your blueprint, go ahead and place one on one side and then one on the opposite side, and you want the walls facing each other. And for this, name it whatever you want. So we'll just name this temp 1. Go ahead and clear your designer. And this right here is the trick if you ever want to build outside of the blueprint designer. We can take our temp 1, and you'll notice I can place it exactly inside the blueprint designer, or as long as half of it is inside the blueprint designer, the other half doesn't have to be. So I can't go farther than this, but right here I could place it. So if I place that one there, and then I go to the other side and I do the exact same thing, make sure that it's lined up. And now what I can go ahead and do is just delete all of this in the middle. And even though nothing is inside the blueprint designer, I can still save it like this. And now I have temp 2, and I can do the exact same thing. I can now place half of it outside of the blueprint designer and then come over here and do the exact same thing. Now with this one you may need to actually delete this first. And now there is a gap of 10 in between the two. And if you notice, for the big circle, it is the center foundation, and then on the 10th one is where that needs to be. So we can keep doing this until we get out to that distance, or I believe this is actually really close to being how far we need the small one. So I believe the small one you're gonna have the very center, and then it's gonna go out, and the 5th one is gonna be where you need it. So the gap in between is going to be 9. So this is actually slightly too far for the big one. So let's go ahead and clear that. So I'm remaking that second temporary one because the distance wasn't quite right. So instead of going the max distance, I brought them both in by 4 meters. So now we'll just call this temp 3. So if we look at the small roundabout, if we go from the very center, it's going to be the 6th foundation on either any of the sides is where the track is going to be. So if I have this here, that's what we're aiming for. So I want it to be able to line up with that foundation. Any farther is too far, any shorter and it's just not going to merge up like it's supposed to. So now I've got my 3rd iteration and I can find just the right spot, lock it in place, nudge it one more over, and yep, that's exactly where that's supposed to be. And then I can go ahead and do the exact same thing on this side. And that's lined up perfect. So now what I want to do is grab all of this center stuff, get this out of the way, and then what we're going to do is we're going to grab a 2-meter foundation and we're going to stick that right in the middle. Let's go ahead and clear this out. And actually, before we do that, I'm going to make this even easier on myself, and we're going to do the exact same thing for all 4 sides. And now that I've got my little backstop set, and if you're curious how I know these numbers, it's because if you ever wanted to create a circle, what I would say the old-fashioned way is you're gonna set down a foundation, and then if you want the biggest circle, it's 1 foundation, and then you zoop it out 10 in all 4 directions, and then you would delete this center, go back. If you hold control, scroll the mouse wheel once, and now we can repeat the process, and you zoop out 10 in all directions. I think I messed that up both times. Neither one of those is 10. And then you just keep repeating the process until you've gone all the way around. And as you can see, right at the end, you'll get pretty clean connections all the way across, and this will make you one giant circle. And so that's how I know the distance for how far these need to be. And that's for the large roundabout. For the smaller one, it's basically half that. It is the center plus 5. So if I were to place the center one, and then I'm going to zoop it out 5 in each direction, and then delete the center, hold control. For this, I'm going to go 2 clicks because it's half as big as the other. We'll just do 1 more, 2 more clicks, zoop out 5. So as you can see, again, pretty clean. And if you continue this all the way around, it'll get you pretty close to a circle. So it's this methodology that we're using for this. So that's why these are spaced out. That distance is it's the same as doing this very last row, doing a circle this way. So we're going to do the same thing. We'll get these lined up with the little backstop I have here, so we know that they're the exact distance they need to be. So we can go ahead and place that one there. Delete these. And then same with this one. The only problem with placing this one here is this blueprint designer. Alright, so grab the blueprint, nudge it into place, make sure we've got everything lined up. Perfect. Okay, so now we're just going to delete this centerpiece, and then we're going to go ahead and add just a normal 2-meter foundation. And this right here is what we're going to be working with. So to get this whole thing to work, the one thing you have to remember is just on the blueprint designer, even if I hold control, I can only rotate this in 45 degrees. But on top of another foundation, I can get those finer movements. So I'm going to place 1 foundation in the center, and then I'm going to go ahead and place down a second one. Go ahead and make this default. So the very first one is just going to be completely straight. And then we're going to go ahead and grab the blueprint that has all 4 sides. We're going to go ahead and place that down. Now what we're going to do is we're going to delete those top 2 foundations. Now with this one, we're going to hold down Control, and we're going to rotate it in either direction 2 times. And we're going to go ahead and place that one. Now when we grab our blueprint, now it's going to snap to this one, which is already 2 notches over, which is exactly where it needs to be to line up with each one of the existing pieces. Go ahead and place it. Delete the top 2. Grab another one. It should already be the 2 notches that we did last time, and we're just going to rotate it 2 more times. Place it there. And there we go, there's the 3rd piece. Delete these 2. Hold Control. 2 more notches. And then I like to lock it in place and make sure that you're not off by, 1 meter in the wrong direction when you place that very first foundation. Just so you don't get too far in before you realize you've made a mistake. Alright, we hold Control. 2 more. And there we go. And we're almost there. Because we have all 4 sides working at the same time, we only have to place 9, I think. And place that one. And this should be the last one. So let's lock it in place and make sure. Perfect. And there we go. So it's as simple as that. And now I have a roundabout. So it is obviously a little bit elevated, but I found that's really not a problem at all. If you used 1 meter foundations, then the gap would only be, it would only be raised 2 meters off of the blueprinter. But when I place them, I haven't noticed that that's an issue at all. And I'll show you why. Back over at our handy test track here, let me go ahead and redo this a little bit so I can give you an example. Now we have a nice long straight piece that we can add a junction to. So when I'm building track, it's usually one of 2 things are happening. Either I know exactly where I want a roundabout to be, and then I'll build accordingly. Or what happens probably more often is I'll build a track for a huge section, knowing that eventually I'll come back to an area and need it. But sometimes thinking that far ahead and building it exactly the way you need to, just, 100 hours ahead of time, it's a little hard to do. So when I run into that and I need to add a junction to an existing railroad track, this is how I build it. So I've got my smaller roundabout, and if I have it in blueprint mode, you'll see that it'll snap to my blueprints. But one that I really like is if I have one of these placed, I can snap to the bottom of it. And if I lock that in place, it's the exact height I need it to be at. So sometimes I'll place one of these, snap it to, either exactly where I want it or just in the middle of the foundation, in the middle of a blueprint where it's easiest. And then that way I can anchor the roundabout to the bottom of that, and it just makes the whole thing really easy. So I can see that it lines up. We've got the right height for everything, so let's just go ahead and place it. Now obviously I don't want these going straight through, so let's just delete those 3. And we can go ahead and delete this because I'd probably either redo it in some way, and I may just extend that all the way down like I have in other places, or maybe I'll put a radar tower and I'll put the power, here and there instead. You've got lots of options with these sorts of things. But to connect this, let me show you what I do. So it's already exactly a ½ meter off. So I usually fill in this gap by just placing a ½ meter foundation. And then I'm going to go ahead and get rid of 7 of the walls. So the center one, and then 3 on either side. And then I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the first wall on both of these sides. So I'll just fill in this gap. We're just going to go ahead and clip those straight through. That's fine. Now to add a little something here, because the train tracks are obviously going to need to curve onto the roundabout, so I need to add a little bit something here, or else they're just going to be floating. The easiest way I found is just to take the painted beam. In freeform mode, you want to snap it to the center of the foundation, not the top or the bottom. Right in the center. This one's going to go right on the edge of those two foundations, and then we're just going to click it right there at the end there. Now, if I grab another foundation, it'll snap to the very end of that beam. So if I lock it in place and then just nudge it 4 meters and 4 meters, it's right in the corner where I want it to be. I can switch it to zoop, and it won't zoop in the right direction, but the second one will, and then we can just clip it straight through right there. If you use asphalt, you won't have nearly the same kind of overlapping lines with the end, but a lot of this gets covered up by the train tracks, so I really don't mind. And then obviously you just got to delete your painted beam, and then you just do the same thing to place the walls. You just grab the 1 meter, you go up 3, delete the bottom 2, and then we can go ahead and zoop this across. If for some reason that didn't line up, the very last one, you can always just nudge it into place. Holding control will let you nudge by 1/2 meter, and that sort of a thing will come in real handy when trying to merge together different lines. Sometimes this gap just won't be a convenient full foundation length. So as far as laying the track to this sort of a thing, it's pretty easy. There is one major piece you need to keep in mind though. So wherever you start, and I like to start, if I know the rail is coming in this way, I want to start like right in the center. That way any of the connections will be equal distant on either side. So if we want to do that, I want to make sure that I'm starting from a completely straight edge. So I'm going to place it right there, and then I'm going to bring it to some temporary foundations just so this is completely straight, knowing that this connection will be right on that line. And then I'm basically going to do the same thing that I did before, where it's every 2 foundations, but now instead of being on the split of 2, it's right in the middle. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And thankfully that ends up right on the opposite side, so we know we're real even. And then we come back around, we can go ahead and delete that straight section and any of the temporary foundations you had to place. I think that one was too. There we go. And there you go. And as far as connecting the straight pieces, the closest you want to get is to that foundation line right there. So 1.5 foundations back from this last big piece is where you want to have the straight part end. And then from here, we can just connect it to the line. And there you go. And that's how you can add a roundabout into an existing line fairly easily. And you could pretty much do the whole thing while having rail lines connected, and then just delete it and do that last connection very last. It'll be a little bit weird having trains run straight through, but I've done it before. You can just add this pretty easily without having to just delete everything and rebuilding it from scratch. And now that you know that the gap is basically this 1/2 meter foundation, if say I wanted to add this roundabout so I could branch off a line this way, I can come over to say this side. I can just place this 1/2 meter foundation. I can grab my normal straight piece of track that has the 2 lines, lock it in place, and then we can basically just do the exact same thing again. Delete those, delete these 7 walls. Try not to delete the track you just placed. And we can add the merging line here. So we just grab the track, add that, go out to here, and then out to there. And there we go. We just needed to delete that wall and that wall, and add that spot right there so it's not floating. And now we have a nice roundabout junction. So with the smaller roundabout, you're really only going to be able to use 4 connections, which in a lot of cases is all you're ever going to need. But if you do need more than 4, then you're going to want to use the bigger roundabout, because since it's so much bigger, you're able to add a few more connections if you have the need for that big of an intersection. But a lot of times the small ones work great. So again, I'm going to keep this video a little bit shorter, and I want to go over some of the signaling and some more of the actual logistics in a future video. But just to give you the real important rule of thumb when it comes to any sort of intersection or interchanges like this, if you remember one thing, it's that you want a path signal going in and you want a block signal going out. If you remember that rule of thumb, that will eliminate 90% of any issues with intersections. It's just path in, block out. Obviously these connections don't have anywhere to go, so we're going to get warning symbols. But if you set up intersections like that, it's going to save you a lot of headache. So that's going to do it for this video on my supports and roundabouts. I think in the next video I want to briefly go over the signaling and whatnot. I think there are hundreds of fantastic videos about those that can probably explain it better than I can. But I do want to go into some of the actual logistics on using the trains and the throughput and whatnot. So look forward to that, and thanks for watching.